Hello everyone, welcome to Inconvenient Truths. I'm your host, Jennifer Zeng. Today I will talk about the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP's recent threat of bombing Australia, and 3 reasons why Australia dares to stand up against the CCP as a relatively much smaller country. Recently, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that the Australian government's policy towards Taiwan would remain firm and unchanged, and that Australia would fulfill its commitment to support the United States and its allies if the CCP invades Taiwan. In response to his statement, Hu Xijin, the chief editor of the CCP's mouthpiece, The Global Times, said in his Weibo post that China should conduct long-range strikes on Australian soil. Hu Xijin said, given that Australian hawks keep hyping and hinting that Australia will assist the US military and participate in war once a military conflict breaks out in the Taiwan Strait, and the Australian media outlets have been actively promoting this sentiment, I suggest China make a plan to impose retaliatory punishment against Australia once its militarily interference in the cross-strait situation. The plan should include long-range strikes on the military facilities and the relevant key facilities on Australian soil if it really sends its troops to China's offshore areas and combats against the People's Liberation Army. This plan should not only be available, but should also be revealed to the outside world through informal channels and to deter extremist forces in Australia from taking irresponsible actions in a desperate manner. China loves peace and will not take the initiative to pick a fight with faraway Australia. But Australian hawks must be clear-minded that if they are bold enough to coordinate with the US to militarily interfere in the Taiwan issue and send troops to the Taiwan Strait to wage war with the People's Liberation Army, they must know what disasters they would cause to their country. China has a strong production capability, including producing additional long-range missiles with conventional warheads that target military objects in Australia when the situation becomes highly tense. China observers believe that Hu Xijin didn't just say these words for nothing. He was actually echoing what Xi Jinping said earlier. In January this year, Xi Jinping made a speech to the CCP's major leading cadres at provincial and ministerial levels and said, "We must both dare to fight and be good at it, and strengthen ourselves comprehensively, especially to enhance our strength of deterrence." Actually, in May last year, Hu Xijin said in the Weibo post that China needs to expand its nuclear warheads to the level of 1,000 in a relatively short period of time, including at least 100 Dongfeng 41 strategic missiles to curb US strategic ambitions and its desire to target China. And China needs to use nuclear weapons to shape the attitudes of the US elite towards China. Also in April this year, Zhang Kejian, director of the National Space Administration of the CCP, has revealed that China will discuss the construction of a near-Earth asteroid defense system. People suspected that could be the CCP's version of the Star Wars program. What I want to say is that although the CCP's military power is far less than that of the United States at present, its madness and evilness could be more fatal to the world. And this is the most difficult for the United States and the international community to deal with, and also the most important to plan for. As long as the CCP is not dismantled, the world is not safe. You might also wonder why Australia, as a relatively smaller country out of so many countries in the West, has the guts to stand up to the CCP. As far as I can see, there are 3 reasons. Back in 2005, there was a very high-profile event in Australia. Chen Yonglin, a CCP diplomat, the Political Affairs Counsel at the Chinese consulate in Sydney, defected to Australia. When he quietly walked out of the Chinese consulate and went to the Australian Immigration Department, he told the staff there that, "I'm from the Chinese consulate in Sydney and I want to seek political asylum from Australia." Then he gave them his Chinese passport. And you know what? The immigration officer immediately picked up the phone and called the Chinese consulate and asked them, "Do you really have someone who is called Chen Yonglin? Does he really work for you?" Chen Yonglin was immediately scared to death. He never expected that his defection would be revealed and betrayed like this. So the CCP immediately knew that he had defected. They right away formed a 3-person assassination team and sent them to Sydney to try to kill Chen Yonglin. Frankly speaking, I don't think the Australian immigration officer's intention was to betray Chen Yonglin or to endanger his life. Then why did this officer choose to call the Chinese consulate to confirm Chen Yonglin's identity? Because deep in this officer's minds, people in the Chinese consulate are just like their colleagues and can be trusted and turned to when needed. I tell this story to illustrate how deeply Australia had been infiltrated by the CCP back in 2005. Anyway, Chen Yonglin initially planned to stay very low-key after he decided to walk away from the Chinese consulate. He had rented a place in a very remote small town and planned to quietly live there without causing any attention. However, because the Australian immigration officer revealed his defection, and because the CCP intended to assassinate him, and because he knew that the CCP had kidnapped people from inside Australia before, he knew his life was in grave danger. So he was forced to become high profile and started exposing the CCP to the media and to the public. And you know what? One of his main tasks as a political counsel was to persecute Falun Gong in Sydney. But through his direct contacts with Falun Gong practitioners, he came to know that these people were all innocent, good people to be trusted. One of the reasons he chose to walk out of the Chinese consulate was that he didn't want to help the CCP to persecute Falun Gong anymore. The CCP had connected a blacklist of about 800 Falun Gong practitioners in Sydney before he walked away, so he erased that list from the Chinese consulate's computer system before he left. Anyway, ironically, when he found his life was in danger, the only people he dared to trust were Falun Gong practitioners whom he was ordered to persecute before. As the CCP had already found out where he lived, he had to abandon the place he rented and leave that small town. He then entrusted the lives of his entire family, including his wife, his daughter, and himself, to a Falun Gong practitioner by staying at her home. That was also why I was chosen to act as his media contact person during that most difficult time. So these pictures were taken during that period when I helped him with media exposure. Sometimes I appeared in the media and events together with him. Sometimes I drove him to meet with Australian media and politicians. Anyway, Chen Yonglin exposed many secrets of the CCP then, including that there were about 1,000 CCP spies and informants in Australia, how the CCP wanted to turn Australia into its puppet via political, diplomatic, economic, and even cultural channels. Just to mention one example here, wealthy Chinese businessmen linked to the CCP had become the largest donors to both major Australian political parties. And sometimes you feel that Australian politicians talked exactly like the CCP officials. Although on the surface, what Chen Yonglin said didn't cause any immediate change in Australia, gradually, especially after more and more Australians felt that things were not right inside Australia because of the CCP's influence and operations in Australia, people started to wake up. In 2018, Clive Hamilton, an Australian professor, published a book entitled Silent Invasion: China's Influence in Australia to reveal the CCP's threats to Australia. He used a lot of information provided by Chen Yonglin in his book. I interviewed Hamilton when he came to the US to promote his book. Media outlets such as ABC also did quite a few reports and TV shows to expose the CCP. So there had been a great Australian-China debate in Australia. Professor Rory Metcalf, head of the National Security College at the Australian National University, especially came to the US to introduce this great Australian-China debate back in 2018, and I covered his event at George Washington University. Now, let's move on to the third reason. Earlier, Elmer Yuan, a Hong Kong businessman I once interviewed, revealed that Australian intelligence agency had intercepted secret information about the CCP virus or COVID-19 from the CCP when Sun Lijun, former Vice Minister of Public Security of the CCP, tried to secretly hand over the information to his wife in Australia for her to keep. So Australia has some inside information about the virus that other countries don't have, and that's why Australia was the first country that said the CCP needed to be held responsible for the spread of the CCP virus pandemic. Anyway, that was revealed by Elmer Yuan in his YouTube show last August. Sun Lijun was indeed suddenly removed from his post in April last year. As late as last February, 2 months before he was removed, he was still sent to Wuhan to inspect the prevention and control work of the pandemic and had appeared in official media many times. Why was he suddenly removed? The CCP said it was because he didn't obey, follow, or respect the party disciplines or rules and had acted recklessly. So from this, people tend to believe that he might indeed know some important information about the virus and was indeed removed because he had handed this information to his wife in Australia. Anyway, the above are the three things that I believe to be the reasons why Australia has become so tough on the CCP. Another very interesting thing is, although the CCP has been inciting nationalism inside China and calling on people to boycott various Australian products, Australia's exports to China reached a record high in the first quarter of this year, with an increase of nearly 21% year-on-year, mainly because the rise in iron ore prices. So you see, the CCP is not really that tough as it appears, right? It relies more on Australia's iron ore to sustain its infrastructure projects than Australia relies on China's imports. Well, that's all for today's Inconvenient Truths. If you find the content interesting, please share it with your family and friends. Please also don't forget to subscribe to and share my channel. Thank you. See you next time.